Well, good morning, and we have to say that it's a real pleasure for us, after the success, let's say it in this way, of the first workshop on gender, methodology, and the Ancient Near East, to be here opening the second workshop on gender, methodology, and the Ancient Near East. As you know, the first one was held in Helsinki, October 2014, so a little bit more than 2 years ago. And in this case, we are here at my current home university, so it's for me also a real pleasure to welcome you in my home university and in my hometown, Barcelona. And well, before beginning with these introductory remarks and everything, we want to begin with the classical thank yous, some news, and also some practical information. About the thank yous, first of all, we have to begin with Adelina Millet-Albà, the current director of the IPOA, who from the very beginning decided to welcome this activity and to host us here at the university. So thanks very much. We also want to thank the Facultat de Filologia and the Màster de Cultures i Llengües de l'Antiguitat of the University of Barcelona, as well as the University of Helsinki, the Academy of Finland, and the Center of Excellence in Changes in Sacred Texts and Traditions for their financial support. We also want to thank colleagues of the IPOA, our Ancient Near Eastern Institute, especially Adelina Millet, Lluís Feliu, Sara Moratinos, Elena Martínez, and Albert Planellas, for their support in logistics these last days and also during the workshop. And also we want to thank Ángel Fernández for volunteering to film and to edit all these, the videos of this first morning of the workshop. And last but not least, we want to thank all of you for joining us. And especially we want to thank all of you who were in Helsinki and who were in previous workshops we organized in other places, like for example, the Rencontre. So thanks very much for your trust and for your academic support, let's say it this way. And moving now to the news, we have two nice news. And the first one is that, well, we are that optimistic that we are announcing that there will be a third workshop on gender, methodology, and the Ancient Near East. And yeah, we are really optimistic. Before beginning the second one, we are announcing the third one. And we think that we have to announce it's not really a workshop, it's a conference. So we began as a workshop, was so small. Those who were there at that time, we were about 20-something, 30 speakers. And now it's clear that we are more than that. So we are going to have a third conference on gender, methodology, and the Ancient Near East. And it's going to be held at the University of Ghent in Belgium, and it's going to be hosted by Katrien de Greef, our colleague, who accepted the kind invitation to co-organize and host this third conference. So thanks very much, Katrien. And of course, all of you are welcome to come to this third conference, which is going to be held hopefully 2019, so in 2 years from now. I have to say at this point that even yesterday during the wine tasting, the preliminary activity, I heard some people talking about even another one. So it seems we are planning the fourth conference. But well, at this point, let's stop with the third one. It's not bad to begin. We have another news we want to share with you, is that we are going to publish proceedings of this second workshop. Proceedings are going to be published by a team of 4 people who are our colleagues, Megan Cifarelli, Stephanie Bedin, Adelina Millet, and myself. So we are going to be the 4 of us editing these proceedings, which are going to be published at the series Barquino Monográfica Orientalia, which is a series jointly published by the University of Barcelona and the Ancient Near Eastern Institute. So thanks very much for this editorial committee who also accepted this kind invitation. And finally, well, at this point, let me just announce a couple of tiny practical details just to help you to navigate these days through the building. First important thing, I'm pretty sure all of you are looking forward to the coffee break. So it's important to know where is it going to be held. Is it going to be at the courtyard of the main building, the historical building, so that direction when you go out, and it's going to be easy to find it, hopefully, because you have to follow people who, like us, have this light pink badge. So when you find these people, you can just follow them for the coffee break. Also, the lunch break that is going to be for speakers and poster presenters is going to be there as well, so just follow us. And if you have any logistic question these days here in Barcelona, as the people with this light pink badge. And also about the other breaks, so you have this coffee break during the morning, and then we have a fruit break each afternoon, so a more healthy break, let's say it this way, which is going to be held in room 0.3, that is just in this same floor, ground floor of the building, just around the corner. So it's pretty easy to find it. Each afternoon, you're going to find their fruit break, and there are all the posters. So it means that each afternoon you're going to have an opportunity to have a look on the posters, to read them, and to eat some fruit. And finally, we have to announce, unfortunately, a last-minute cancellation. So there is one change in the program. Luckily, it's only one, so that's not bad. And it's Laura Mazov, who is Thursday morning in the first panel. She was the very last in the first panel. And we decided just to keep the schedule as it is. So we are going to begin at the same time tomorrow, but we are going to have some more time for discussion and a slightly longer coffee break. Okay, so just this cancellation. And once it's said, with further delay, we are going to begin with introduction. Thanks.
Thank you, Agnès. And thank you also for my own part. Can I move on? Yeah.
Well.
Thank you also for my own part to everybody who's managed to get here. It's really amazing to see just how many people are interested in this topic. The main aim of the workshop, as has been before, is to discuss some possible methodological and theoretical approaches to gender within the framework of ancient Near Eastern studies. For this reason, the communications and posters are going to be diverse. They are diverse as the many possibilities of enriching the interpretation of our ancient Near Eastern material, applying theoretical proposals to study of gender, women and men. In addition, the program of this workshop is varied in regards to its contributors. We wanted to involve colleagues from different countries with different academic traditions and theoretical backgrounds in different stages of their careers. In this respect, we are glad to count among the participants recognized scholars with a long history of applying gender perspectives to the study of the ancient Near East, and to include the points of view of younger scholars currently completing their PhDs. Moreover, we sought to involve in this initiative scholars explicitly interested in gender studies, but also those with an interest in theoretical and methodological approaches in a broader sense, as we believe that gender studies can benefit from exchange of ideas. We would like to thank all of you for your willingness to cooperate. Thanks to this diversity, we are certain that the workshop is even richer in its attempt to show the potential of gender studies in our field. The main sources, chronologies, and topics covered by the contributions are as varied as the contributors. Indeed, we endorse the notion that gender studies are applicable not just to a specific period or to a specific type of source, but rather that they can be applied to all sources and all periods. Thus, one of our main goals is to reframe analysis in order to apply critical approaches to sources. Several communications and posters relate to women and/or gender in the ancient Near East, but this workshop can and should be placed within a larger context than just women's studies, gender studies, or feminist studies. Doing gender studies is just one possible theoretical approach among others. Thus, it needs to be justified and explained in the larger context of general significance of theory and methodology in the ancient Near Eastern studies. In this larger framework, it becomes obvious that this workshop, despite its title, is not only about gender. It's actually about the bigger question. Can we be objective in the study of ancient Near East? Is it possible to study them without being involved as a we? To this question, humanities and social sciences in general answer firmly no. There are discussions and debates as to what degree research is subjective, but the possibility of absolutely objective research has been conclusively refuted. There is the obvious countermove of naming objective research as a desired goal, even when it can never be fully reached. However, this answer seems too easy for us, being merely an attempt to ignore the problems inherent in positivistic research. To draw a rather bold analogy, it resembles a painter who is told that his or her eyes deceive him or her and decides thereafter to work blindfolded. In this direction, in what follows in this introduction, we will outline two main issues. First, the relationship between ancient Near Eastern studies and gender studies, and second, we present some remarks on the use of theory and methodology in the field of Assyriology.
I want to start by talking about labels then. Gender studies, women's studies, masculinity studies, and feminist research are labels that most of us use when describing our research and when providing theoretical frameworks for it. In addition, even those who do not discuss these labels explicitly can be ascribed to one or more of them. This is because all of these labels share some common points, but at the same time present interesting nuances and differences. Thus, choosing to use one instead of another is meaningful. We defend that this variety is enriching and helps to show that applying gender perspectives to the study of ancient Near East may involve diverse strategies. As you know, these labels are understood in diverse ways in research. Gender studies is nowadays the most commonly used label for three main reasons. First, it is often perceived as being the broadest and most inclusive. Thus, it may be considered as the best one to encompass diversity. This is why we have chosen to use gender for the title of our workshop. Second, gender studies is often chosen instead of women's studies because it is understood as being more complex than merely women's studies. Third, gender studies is often chosen instead of feminist research, with the former being seen as neutral and the latter as biased, and practically the second being seen as more politically loaded. In what follows, we discuss some salient features surrounding the second and the third arguments. To start with the second one, the preference of using gender studies rather than women's studies, we have to say that this preference is linked to a chronological, even evolutionary, pattern often followed when presenting the birth and development of gender studies as a discipline, the so-called waves of gender studies. It is commonly agreed, as you know, that there are three waves. The first can be dated to the 60s, 1960s, and 1970s, the second to the late 1970s, 1980s, and the third from the late 1980s and the 90s until present day. During the first wave, women were foregrounded. They were made a matter of record. One of the main aims of the second wave was to track down the so-called origins of patriarchy and to consider gender as a category of analysis. Finally, the third wave arose in close connection with postmodernism, and it includes such trends as queer studies and what has been labeled as post-feminist studies. Following these phases, women's studies form the kernel of what nowadays is a broader and more inclusive research area, gender studies, which is not only devoted to women, but to men, to the construction of gender, and to the analysis of gender relationships. We agree that using gender as a category of analysis is preferable then. By considering gender together with other factors, for example, age or hierarchy, and analyzing how these factors interact and are constructed in the primary sources, we can build more complex historical narratives. By necessity, however, women's studies and women's history remain. Their primary aim, which is making women visible and writing them into history and also into academia, has not been yet fully accomplished in ancient Near Eastern studies. For this reason, we do not defend a replacement of women's studies or women's history by gender studies, but instead we stress the need for coexistence and dialogue between the two, as well as the need for a more complex definition of what it means to be doing women's studies. Our aim is summarized well by Zainab Bahrani, and I quote, "Rather than simply finding women in history, it attempts to find what women means in the historical record," end of quote. Moving now to the third argument, using gender studies instead of feminist research, the former label is perceived by many scholars as more suitable for respectable research. The label feminist research is often considered as being associated with political claims and agendas, which are seen as too much in the foreground and potentially disturbing for the development of research. While we appreciate the reticence of scholars to depend on such a politically charged label, we also accept that all research has political implications, explicit or implicit. Regarding gender studies, it seems impossible to disconnect it from feminist movements and claims, as they were integral to women's studies in the 1960s and the 1970s, and gender studies later on, in a broad sense, are also dependent on this as well. In fact, academic feminism initiated the process of acknowledging that women were underrepresented, both in the historical discourse and in academia, and these are still important factors for most scholars dealing with gender studies today. Furthermore, the claim for scientificity in research assumes that good research has to be unbiased. However, no research can be unbiased or impartial. Honest research, we defend, must be aware of biases and explicit about them.
Accepting that any research on culture and language is subjective leads to a number of important requirements for research. To us, this postmodern turn in research methodology does not mean that all theories and methodologies are equally good, let alone all research being equally good. Nonetheless, it does specify that knowledge is produced, not discovered, by scholars, and it necessitates that good research be, first, explicit about its hypothesis, 2, explicit about its use of theory and concepts, and 3, explicit about its contemplation of methodology. We see this as the cornerstone of research, including the study of gender in the ancient Near East. At this point, we should define how we understand theory and methodology in this workshop. What's the difference between the two? What we regard as theoretical approach is, for example, the broad claim that gender is always constructed in a society, that it's not a biological given. Compared to that, methodology embodies a more specific question. What is the best way to process our sources in order to answer a specific research question? For Assyriologists, for example, a close reading of the texts based on the idea of hermeneutic circle and source criticism often works as a fruitful method. Part of the method can be the specific vantage point, the lens for the reading, provided by the chosen theoretical framework. Thus, in this workshop, at least based on the titles and abstracts of communications and posters, we presume that they will be perhaps more theoretical than methodological variation. We suggest that Assyriology as a field would benefit greatly from bringing to the forefront its theories and methodologies and engaging more fully with diverse methodological and theoretical approaches. It is important to emphasize, however, that a simple cut and paste approach from other fields is hardly possible. It is crucially important not to force theory upon primary sources. Instead, a nuanced understanding and balanced application of theoretical and methodological approaches will enable scholars to identify how Assyriological knowledge of the past is produced. During recent decades, a number of people and institutions have fully engaged in interdisciplinary studies, using their Assyriological knowledge as a base of operations. In particular, online corpora have made possible a number of studies that simply couldn't have been done 20 years ago. By no means do we wish to undervalue that work. What we are saying is that even more is needed, especially when the study of gender is concerned. Otherwise, Assyriology as a field faces the danger of self-isolation. There are many recent publications and workshops in the field of ancient Near Eastern gender studies, and this is a selection of them. And it makes us very proud indeed to welcome so many of our colleagues here today who have been involved in these publications and conferences. While this is not, of course, a comprehensive list, these examples illustrate the point well enough. Looking at the bibliographies on women and gender in the ancient Near East, although the volumes appearing in recent years are not significantly more than what has been published in the past, they do show a promising trend of such things appearing in the field of Assyriology at regular intervals. What many of the volumes and workshops mentioned here do, and what we hope for our small part to accomplish in this workshop, is to celebrate the richness of interdisciplinary, indeed intermethodological research. To build up a real understanding of ancient complex phenomena such as gender, a scholar needs to have a myriad vantage points on the topic. In addition to adding to the depth of analysis, using theory often enables us to add new possible interpretations, not only to the historical narrative or the study of social phenomena, but also to the core concern of Assyriology, namely translation. All in all, making theory and methodology more visible affects the research questions that in turn affect research answers and writing of history. We are certain this workshop will enable us to reflect on all these issues and to establish fruitful dialogues among the diverse disciplines here represented. Thanks again for making it possible, and let's give the floor to Adelina Millet again to chair the first panel. Thank you.